Welcome to day 166 on the trail. We have three readings for today from 1 Corinthians 11, verse 2 through 22, Judges 3, verse 1 through 5:31, and 2 Maccabees chapter 4, verses 23 through 29. Today, we will focus our time together on our reading from the book of Judges. As we pointed out in the beginning of chapter 2, a pattern develops in the book of Judges. Repeatedly, the people break their covenant with God and suffer the consequences for their actions. However, in His mercy, God raises up a judge to rescue them from their oppressors. And as long as the judge is alive, the people remain faithful to God. However, as soon as the judge dies, the people regress, and then the cycle repeats. Throughout the book of Judges, we will experience 13 of these cycles spanning approximately 330 years. About 110 of those years are spent following God and living in peace. But this also means that 2/3 of this period is spent in slavery, turmoil, and oppression. In today's reading, we pick up in the third of these cycles. Before we begin, remember that a judge is more of a military leader than what we may think of as a judge today, someone who is appointed to settle disputes. Although judges in this period did perform that function as well. In this period, a judge, or shofet, was someone upon which God sent His Spirit in a special way to rescue His people. Our text for today is from Judges 4 and tells the story of Deborah. As the story opens, we immediately hear the sounds of war, which has come to the streets of Israel. The people are afraid and staying at home. Those who do venture out keep to the byways, because the main roads were unsafe for travel. Marauders attack caravans, disrupt commercial trading, and affect village life. Even on their farms, it was not safe to sow or harvest crops. King Jabin ruled Canaan from Hatzor, and the commander of his army was Sisera. As commander of the Canaanite army, Sisera and his 900 chariots of iron oppressed Israel for 20 years. So God sends word to a prophetess named Deborah, who was also judging Israel at the time, and she is to summon Barak to gather 10,000 men from the tribes of Naphtali and Zebulun to fight against Sisera. The time had come for God once again to rescue His people. However, Barak tells Deborah that he will not fight against Sisera without Deborah at his side. So we pick up the story in verse 8. Barak said to her, "If you will go with me, I will go. But if you will not go with me, I will not go." And she said, "I will surely go with you. Nevertheless, the road on which you are going will not lead to your glory, for the Lord will sell Sisera into the hands of a woman." Then Deborah got up and went with Barak to Kadesh. Although God had promised victory over Sisera, Barak is having a hard time trusting God. God has given him a task, a chance to set God's people free, but his faith is wavering. So to support Barak, Deborah agrees to accompany him and his army. However, he will not receive the glory for defeating Sisera. That honor will go to a woman. We should not overlook the faithfulness and courage of Deborah in this exchange. Deborah does not hesitate. Deborah is confident that God is going to keep His promises and deliver His people. The 10,000 Israelites assemble at Kadesh. However, in verse 11, we find an odd mention of a group of Kenites, descendants of the father-in-law of Moses, who had moved from the area of Mount Sinai to the region of Kadesh. Kenites were not Israelites, so we will see how they will play a role in the story shortly. Sisera receives word that Barak's army has been assembled, and he goes to meet the threat with his 900 ironclad chariots. God steps in to help the Israelites by throwing Sisera and all his chariots into a panic, allowing Barak to rout the army of Sisera. Here's where the story takes an interesting turn. Seeing that the battle has turned against him, Sisera jumps off his chariot and flees, leaving his army to be slaughtered. And when the dust settles, all that is left of his army is Sisera. Now turning to verse 17. Now Sisera fled away on foot to the tent of Jael, wife of Heber the Kenite. For there was peace between King Jabin of Hazor and the clan of Heber the Kenite. Now recall that the Kenites were outsiders to Israel, but also related to Moses' father-in-law. Therefore, Sisera is not worried about turning to one of them for help. So thinking that Jael, wife of Heber, would be an ally, he turns to her for assistance, because he thought she was an ally. Verse 18. Jael came out to meet Sisera, and said to him, "Turn aside, my lord, turn aside to me, have no fear." So he turned aside to her into the tent, and she covered him with the rug. The image is quite ironic. Jael takes a great and important general of the Canaanites and hides him under a rug. Verse 19. Then he said to her, "Please give me a little water to drink, for I am thirsty." So she opened a skin of milk and gave him a drink and covered him. He said to her, "Stand at the entrance of the tent, and if anyone comes and asks you, 'Is anyone here?' say, 'No.'" Sisera asks for water, and Jael gives him some milk. Perfect for a good nap. And she agrees to play lookout for Sisera. But then she turns the tables on him. Verse 21. But Jael, wife of Heber, took a tent peg and took a hammer in her hand and went softly to him and drove the tent peg into his temple until it went down into the ground. He was lying fast asleep from weariness, and he died. Now, to be honest, I think the final statement here is a bit unnecessary. And he died. In our story, Barak shows up and asks, "Have you seen Sisera?" Jael tells Barak that Sisera is inside her tent. In the end, as Deborah told Barak, a woman, who is not even an Israelite, will go down as the heroine in this story. Jael is the one who stops Sisera and ends the threat to God's people. And Israel finds rest under Deborah's rule for 40 years. However, as you read today, this is not the real end of the story. In chapter 5, we find the Song of Deborah, a poem praising God for rescuing his people. However, this chapter adds a couple of important details. The most blessed of women be Jael, the wife of Heber the Kenite, of tent-dwelling women most blessed. He asked for water, and she gave him milk. She brought him curds in a lordly bowl. She put her hand to the tent peg, and her right hand to the workman's mallet. She struck Sisera a blow. She crushed his head. She shattered and pierced his temple. He sank. He fell. He lay still at her feet. At her feet he sank. He fell. Where he sank, there he fell, dead. Then the Song of Deborah turns to Sisera's mother, waiting for her son to return. Verse 28. Out of the window she peered. The mother of Sisera gazed through the lattice. Why is his chariot so long in coming? Why tarry the hoofbeats of his chariots? Her wisest ladies made answer. Indeed, she answers the question herself. Are they not finding and dividing the spoil? A girl or two for every man. Spoil of dyed stuffs for Sisera. Spoil of dyed stuffs embroidered. 2 pieces of dyed work embroidered for my neck as spoil. So why paint such a gruesome picture in this victory song? Why paint images of Sisera pinned to the ground with a tent peg, or his mother waiting by the window for him to return? Why look at what Sisera's mother was waiting for? Was she more interested in seeing Sisera or the spoils of war? Does she imagine Sisera selling and victimizing the people of Israel and raiding their houses for plunder? Was she focused on what she would get? New clothes or maybe some new jewelry? Doubtlessly, this is a hard story. But why tell it in such detail? Well, look at the end of the story in Judges 5:31. So perish all your enemies, O Lord. But may your friends be like the sun as it rises in its might. And the land had rest for 40 years. Perhaps, in the end, the lesson here is straightforward. God still demands truth and justice in his world. There is right and wrong, truth and consequences, justice and punishment, friends and enemies of God. And there are consequences for our choices. And those consequences can be severe. And we should always remember that our choices do not just affect us, but those around us. Thank you for joining us today. Until next time, stay on the trail.